Welcome everyone to our office hours this afternoon. We are going to get started since it is 3 o'clock, just to respect everybody's time. So this training is being recorded. If you need to go back to it, it will be on our website and available once it's up there. Please feel free to ask questions. If you're brave enough to come off of mute and ask those questions, feel free. If you do not feel comfortable doing that, drop them in the chat. We will be checking throughout the training today. So today we're going to be talking about the eligibility forms as part of this office hours. And we'll do quick team introductions. We'll go over eligibility requirements. And then we'll go through each of those eligibility forms. And then, of course, we'll go over any questions that pop up. And we have some resources that we like to share at the end. This is our team. My name is Carly Thibodeau, and I have been with this team for 2.5 years. And before that, I was a teacher for 21 years. And with me today, we have Colette.
Hi, everyone. I'm Colette Sullivan. I have been with the team since 2018. And before that, I was also a teacher for 30 years.
Thank you. And Ashley's with us today.
Hi, everybody. My name is Ashley Satry, and I have been on the team just shy of 2 years. And before that, I was a special ed teacher in Maine and Virginia.
Thank you. And Julie.
Hi, I'm Julie Pelletier. I am the admin support for the monitoring team. I have been here for about 8 years now. And before that, I was admin support at a K-5 elementary school for 16 years.
All right. Thank you. And Jennifer Gleason's another member of our team. She's just not with us this afternoon. So we're going to dive right in. And like I said, please feel free to come off of mute and ask questions if they come up, or drop them in the chat. Also, please let me know if I get talking too fast or if you want me to repeat something. I have a tendency to do that, so just call me out on it. It's completely fine. So we're going to dive right in. So the first thing we're going to talk a little bit about is section 2, where you check off those disability categories. Muser goes over the definition for each of these disability categories and the procedure for determination. So it gives the citation to Muser where you can find that information. I also happen to know that it starts on page 75 if you're interested in page numbers. So if you ever have a question about how you determine eligibility for each of these categories, you can find that information here. And talking a little bit more about determining eligibility, in that section 2, you're documenting that disability based on those initial evaluations or reevaluations that were completed. And then the team decides whether the student is eligible under one of those disability categories. So when you're determining eligibility, you need to use one of these eligibility forms. You're either going to use that determination of adverse effect, or we call it the adverse effect form. Or you'll use the specific learning disability eligibility form, or the speech or language impairment eligibility form. So one of those forms needs to be completed when you're talking about these disability categories. There are a couple that also depend on medical diagnoses. And like I said, that's outlined very clearly in Muser when you are in need of those. When you're also thinking about changing eligibility categories, for example, if you have a student that's going from, they were a student that was identified as a student with speech and language impairment, and you had filled out that eligibility form for speech or language a previous IEP meeting, and now you're thinking that maybe they are going to be eligible under autism or maybe even a specific learning disability, you would need to complete the previous eligibility criteria. So if it was speech and language, you would fill out that speech and language eligibility form. And then you would also fill out the new eligibility form, the one that you think that they're moving into, whether it's that specific learning disability, or if you're thinking about autism, it's that adverse effect form. Then you would also need to fill out an eligibility form when you're dismissing from special education services. So if a student has been qualified under any disability category that requires one of those eligibility forms, you would then complete that form, and then that determination, if they're being dismissed, would be that they no longer qualify. So you would need that form in order to show that they've been dismissed. Now, the adverse effect form, or determining the adverse effect on educational performance, this applies to the following disability eligibility categories, and I won't read through them all because they're clearly typed out here, but it's basically all of those minus the specific learning disability or the speech and language impairment. But you can also see that it doesn't apply to deaf blindness or multiple disabilities, and it does have specific learning disability listed there also. Because multiple disabilities, you would do the individual disabilities, so you would have those forms necessary for those individual disabilities, and then you would just mark them as multiple under that section 2, if they were multiple.
Carly, if one of the multiples is other health impairment, though, you would use the adverse effect form for the other health impairment.
Correct. You would use it for the individual disabilities.
Oh, sorry, you said
Nope,
that.
that's okay. So, right. So you would use them for whichever those disability categories that you were thinking about, that the IEP was thinking about. And then if you can't determine which one is the primary, that's when they become the multiple, right? So yeah, so you would still need the forms. It's just that you don't fill it for them all. I know, sounds kind of funny when they
No,
put it in there.
I understand now. I do have one more question. If
Yeah.
in the permission to evaluate planning meeting, we listed multiple suspected disabilities, right? Because we just weren't sure. So let's say we said
Yep.
an emotional disability, other health impairment, and SLD.
Mhm.
And once the data was reviewed, it was very quick. You could see that SLD wasn't one of the options. And so I just answered my own question. I'm going to be quiet. Never mind. Never mind.
Are you sure? Somebody else might be having the same question as you, so you could give them some insight.
Yeah, so in that situation, we would still fill out the SLD as a no, and then fill out the others. I guess I'm thinking there are times where you rule out SLD, and because you're just ruling out SLD, we don't fill out the form. And I was trying to I'm not sure how to ask that question in a scenario, but there are times where in a meeting, you'll say, we're ruling out SLD, but we don't fill out the form. And maybe we should be, but we haven't been. Does that make sense?
Yes, but I guess my question, how did you rule it out if you didn't use the eligibility form?
That's a very good question. I
Okay.
have to think about I have to think about what I'm asking. But there are times that I remember saying at a meeting, I wonder if anybody else has done that, like, we're ruling out SLD. Yeah, I got to think about that. Sorry. for interrupting.
Lena, we learned from you too, so don't ever apologize. These are great questions. They make us think too. It's good. It's
And
good.
I was just going to ask though, is it that you're ruling out that you are testing for SLD, or did you do the test? Because oftentimes we'll be having a conversation about what we're doing for testing, and people are saying, well, we're talking about SLD, and they're like, well, we're not seeing this or we're not seeing that. So you decide not to do the testing, which would be very different.
Agreed. Yes. Yep. Yeah. I mean, it's a great conversation. I know eligibility is a tricky thing. A lot of it is IEP team decision. So just keep that in mind. Yeah. Okay. So Muser identifies adverse effect. And it says that the word adverse commonly means harmful, impeding, obstructing, or detrimental. To adversely affect means to have a negative impact that is more than a minor or transient hindrance, evidenced by findings and observations based on data sources and objective assessments with replicable results. So the other thing to think about when you're determining eligibility is, yes, the student has, low scores or difficulty with this. The evaluations all say that, but there's always that question about, is it adversely affecting them? So that's really what you're thinking about when you're thinking about that eligibility piece, because sometimes a student may be identified as OHI due to ADHD, but it may not be adversely affecting them to the degree that they need an IEP. So that's really thinking about, is it adversely affecting them? Okay, so now we're going to get into the forms themselves, and we're going to focus very heavily on compliance with this, because when we come in and do site reviews, we do look at eligibility forms, and we look to make sure that they are completed with according to compliance and meeting those IDEA MUSA requirements. So we have created some quick reference checklists. We have one for the IEP. We also have one for all of the eligibility forms, the summary of performance, and the written notice. So this link, I believe my title at the top, if you have an electronic copy of this PowerPoint, you can click that and it will take you to this page where these quick reference checklists can be found, so you can access those. Of course, we also have the procedural manual, which is an excellent resource that goes over each of the forms in detail. And so if you compared our quick reference checklists and the procedural manual, you would see that they are pretty similar to each other. So a lot of the information that we put into our checklists came from the procedural manual. It's just outlined within the form itself to try to make it more user-friendly. But we're going to start today by talking about that adverse effect form. So the first thing that we look at is we look to see if those boxes are checked at the top. So you have your reason for use form. Is it for initial or for continuing or dismissal? So best practice is that you check one of these boxes. And also, just a little side note about our forms is everything's broken down into compliance versus best practice. So we've really tried to focus on those pieces. So today you'll see that the blue is best practice and the compliance is red. That's how we have it outlined. So best is to make sure that one of these is always checked on that form. And then this is just directions around the form, and it kind of goes over what we talked about a little bit before about how this is used to determine eligibility for special ed services. It's also used when you're thinking about changing eligibility or dismissing from special education services. And then also it goes over those disability categories where you would use this adverse effect form. And this is all from the procedural manual. Another best practice is that you document the conversation or completion of the form in the written notice by making a statement in the written notice where it just says that the IEP team completed that adverse effect form and determined that the student qualifies or does not qualify for special education services. Just making a statement in the written notice really shows that you went through the form together as a team and made that determination together. Looking at that first question on the adverse effect form, basically you're going to see this throughout the whole form. Just your decisions are based on a variety of sources. So you need to be using more than one assessment, and there's even a question on the eligibility form about that. So thinking about those data sources and then the data from that source, and then really using that data and putting it as verification in the form. And then best practice is that you check each of the boxes for each question. This is more of a clerical thing, but it happens often that those don't get checked. They are left blank. So it's not yes, no, or NA. We don't know which one it is. But really those need to be checked. And then including the summaries and explanations whenever the form directs you to do that. So this first question is around standard or percentile scores through individually administered achievement tests. So compliance is that if you check yes or no, that there is information from sources and they're documented as verification. So you would have your data source, whatever achievement test that was, along with those scores. And then there are some examples of what you could use for different age groups in this for this question specifically. Now, if you check NA, because NA means not available on this form. So if you come to a question, you're like, I don't have anything that proves yes or no, this is an adverse effect, then you would just put NA and no verification is needed. So in that case, if you're putting yes or no, the verification is needed. Otherwise, it would be NA. Here's that second question about the achievement tests, but I believe these are group administered instead of individually administered. So just a little change in information being put here. And again, compliance is that you're putting those data sources along with that data, and then some examples of what you could put there. The third question, again, compliance is always that you're putting information from those sources and that it's documented when you're checking yes or no. And then you've got some examples of data sources that could be used for this third question around reports prepared by the SAU or presented by the parents that document adverse effect. And then question 4 is around performance on comprehensive assessments based on a system of learning results. So again, compliance is that you're putting verification for yes or no. Then there's some more examples of data sources, because I think that's where people get stuck sometimes, is they're not sure what information to put in each question. Some of them will be duplicates. So if you put yes for one question, then you may use that verification from like question 1 to also use it in question 4 or whatever it is. And I'm just throwing out numbered questions. I don't know if that's the case or not. So don't hold me to it. Question 5 is around criterion referenced assessments for academic or functional performance. So if that's a yes or no, include that information from the sources along with the data whenever possible. 6 is around child work products, language samples, or portfolios demonstrating adverse effect. Again, document that information from sources if it's yes or no. If you have nothing, that's when you put that NA for not available. Same for number 7 when it comes to disciplinary evidence or rating scales. So you can see here some of the data sources are disciplinary reports or office referrals. So that may be something that goes here for a yes or no to comply with the verification. Or it could be rating scales from evaluations that were completed. So it can be one or the other or both, depending on what you have available and whether it's adversely affecting. Same with attendance. Attendance is one that we see sometimes is checked yes or no with no verification. So just remembering to include that verification around the yes or no, including those attendance records or a statement about those attendance records. And then number 9, around the child's social or emotional deficits. And again, this may be duplicated from a previous question because it may be more of those rating scales or something like that. But if you're checking yes or no, include that verification from those sources. And then number 10, this one often gets left blank because it's just the other, but best practice would be to check NA if you're not going to put anything there. And then if you put yes or no, obviously add the verification. Then we get to the questions at the end. So this is that question around, was only one assessment or data source considered? So you check yes or no, make sure one of those is checked. That's best practice. And then again, if yes, you need to explain why that was adequate to only have one data source. If you check no, the box can be blank. You do not need to fill that in. It's only if it's checked yes, do you need to fill in the reason or why it was adequate. Then the next question that the team needs to think about is, has the IEP team determined that there's an adverse effect? So this is that piece of, you had all these pieces, verification showing that yes, these things are adversely affecting the student. However, you get to this like kind of final question of, is there an adverse effect on the educational performance? So this is where you're deciding if yes, you're going to proceed. If no, they do not qualify. So again, if you said no to that question before for section 2, you stop. You only go on to section 3 if the answer is yes. So if you said yes, then you move on here onto this next question where it asks, is the adverse effect to such a degree that they require special education? Or can these things be correctable through accommodations in the gen ed setting? So you need to make sure you check one of those boxes. I have seen forms in the past where those are blank, so it's a little bit tricky, but usually from the summary, we can figure out which box was meant to be checked. So definitely include a summary here so that it summarizes why the student needs either special education or it can be corrected through accommodations. All right. Any questions about the adverse effect form?
Nothing in chat, Carly.
Perfect. All right. I have a little quiz for you. This is going to be about the adverse effect form. Okay. So if you want to throw in chat why this is non-compliant. If we came on site and we looked at this form, we would check this out and we would be like, okay, no, this is non-compliant. And why would we say that? Lena?
Best practice doesn't say whether or not it's initial or continued.
Right, it doesn't. And that's actually best practice now. So we wouldn't mark that as non-compliant necessarily, but definitely it is a good idea and best practice to check one of those boxes. Yep. Any other ideas?
It
Are we
looks like
supposed to be able
there's,
to scroll down?
It-
Or
yeah,
No, this is just a screenshot. Whoop, it
okay,
won't
thank
scroll.
you.
Mhm. So it is hard to see, but in that first one, there was no verification because it's checked no. I know it's really small too. I apologize.
Yeah, but we
It's
can't
hard to-
see that, Carly, just so you know.
Oh, you can't?
That's why I
Oh,
asked
that's
if you could
weird.
scroll down. I figured that there
Let
was
me
supposed to be
see.
something in the, yeah.
Must be, yeah. It must be
There we
something
go.
like on, because I can see it on my end. I apologize. So
yep.
it's hard for me to know what you guys can see. But yeah, so there's no verification in that number one, just the no is checked and then verification is blank. So that was the non-compliant piece, but definitely making sure that that is checked, the continuing or initial is best practice. And then compliance is making sure that there's verification for that no. Okay, we're going to move on to the next eligibility form, which I just went in order of, I guess it's alphabetical order because that's how the procedural manual is set up. So we're doing the specific learning disability eligibility form next, which is everybody's favorite. I know it's mine. Just kidding. Sarcasm, because it's a hard form, the specific learning disability form. This is it. And on our checklist that we have for this, that best practice, that last one listed that says utilize the clinical guidance on implementation, that is available. That link is live on our checklist because it is through MASP, the Maine, I'm going to say Maine, hold on, I got to click to my next slide so I can see it. Maine Association of School Psychologists. There we go. So they are the ones that helped develop the specific learning disability eligibility form. So they have a whole guidance manual on how to complete this form. So this is a link that will take you to that to help you fill out this specific learning disability form if you ever have any questions. I'm going to go back to my original right here for a second. So I kind of talk about how compliance for the entire form goes. Really, it's a decision based on a variety of sources, and the information from sources is documented for yes or no. And that's going to be the case for any of the forms, but we try to be specific in each one. And then best practice is checking the box for each of the questions for the yes, nos, including those summaries that are being asked when there are summary boxes. And then again, documenting the conversation that the form was completed during the meeting. So that's why there's a little snip from the written notice about the SLD form being completed during the meeting and that the student qualified for special education services. So again, here's that link to the clinical guidance on implementation. So this is a guide that will help you go through the SLD form through MASP. But here is our information about compliance versus best practice when we come on site to look at these forms. Question 1 is a tricky one because it's a negative. So number 1, in order to qualify and keep moving on to answer more questions, you have to answer no. And sometimes we see it answered yes, and then people keep going with the form because the way the question is worded, it's like a trick question. So just know that if the student is achieving adequately in each of these grade levels, then you would check yes. If they are not achieving adequately, then you check no, and then you put the areas that they're not achieving adequately. It's a very confusing question. But here you can see you want to document your sources where you have information about those areas where they're not achieving adequately. And there are some examples of data sources that you can use. When you move on to question 2, again, just remember to check the yes, no boxes. This form, for some reason, is one that I see the yes, nos get left off often. And then the verification, wherever those boxes say verification, there must be verification in there for the yes or the no. So really document that information as best you can. And then question 3, this one that's broken up into those 4 separate questions. Again, each one of those needs to have verification. Oftentimes, we'll see blank verifications on like 3 of them and only 1 has verification. But you really do need to make sure that you're putting verification for each one. And we give some examples of where you can get that verification from. And then just remembering that last note, the question C, or actually any of them, it's not asking whether the child has these things. It's whether any such disability is a primary cause of the child's failure to achieve adequately. So the student may have an emotional disability, but if it's not their primary cause, then you would still check no. So I know that throws people sometimes when you're thinking about a student that does have some emotional stuff or things like that. So just keep that in mind. It's not if they have it, just if it's their primary cause for their failure to achieve. Then question 4, this is the one that I see that yes, no gets skipped often because it's like up away from all those boxes. So just make sure you check yes or no there. And then fill in as much as you can about the strengths and weaknesses for each of these A through D, because really the specific learning disability is based off of those strengths and weaknesses. So there needs to be multiple sources. Yes, it is repetitive. I would agree with you. Yeah. And I know this is a hard one for some. So, just do the best you can filling in that information. And then 5 is that relevant behavior noted during the observation, and best practice is to summarize that. I always like to say it gives me the ick to leave blank boxes. So I would either put like NA or none if, instead of just leaving it blank. So best practice really would put something in there, even if it was NA or none. But really, it's best to summarize something from that observation, because if you're thinking about a specific learning disability for a student, there should be a classroom observation that you can take note of and put in here. And then educationally relevant medical findings. Again, I personally would want to put NA or none if I were filling out this form, because I don't like to leave blank boxes. But again, best practice is that you summarize relevant medical findings. If there isn't anything, then again, I would just put none available or something like that, or none known. Then number 7, this is required only if you check no. So you're saying whether the evaluations utilized were valid and reliable assessments and performed by qualified individuals. So if you check yes, you don't need to do anything. If you check no, then you have to fill out the verification. But if it's yes, you can just move on to the next question.
Carly, this one makes me chuckle, right? Because
Yeah, I know.
why would you have someone who wasn't qualified, or why would you even use the form if you didn't? I know.
Really, I know it is. Every time I filled one out, when I was a part of an IEP team meeting, we'd be like, oh, no, I mean, it was kind of a joke. Yeah. Okay. And then getting to the conclusions part of the SLD form, does the specific learning disability exist? And there are many directions here. So you can say yes, or you say yes if all of these things are true. So it goes through the whole form for you. Like if question 1 is no, then you can say yes. If question 2, and so on. So if it's no, then the following must be true. And one of those would be a yes. That's why I always go back to that question number 1. When you check yes on accident, you've already said the student doesn't qualify for a specific learning disability, even though you filled out the rest of the form. So just be careful with your yeses and nos. It's a tricky thing, this form. Then we move on. And so you've said that there's a learning disability for this student. And now again, we have to talk about or make that decision. Is it of such nature and degree that they require special ed services, or can it be addressed through gen ed with accommodations? So even if you've said they have a specific learning disability, you still decide whether it's to the degree that they need an IEP, special ed services. So the first one could have been yes, and this one can be no. It's an IEP team decision. But really thinking about which one is it? Check A or B. Again, I have seen this where they're blank. So it's like, okay. And then you put the summary in to explain why you've decided that yes, they need special ed services, or no, they're going to, have accommodations and stay in the gen ed setting. Oh, and then we get to the last page with the signatures. This is one that we get caught up on because all team members must sign this form. It is in IDEA. And so we get a lot of questions about, well, if they just verbally say, can we just put they've agreed, everyone has agreed, and there are no signatures, but they just type in everyone has agreed. We can't do that. Like, that's non-compliant in our eyes because of this information from IDEA that says that each group member must certify in writing whether it reflects their conclusion and their agreement. So we have to see the signatures. So we've talked to a lot of SAUs because this has been a huge hindrance for a lot of people because they're still doing Zoom or partial Zoom meetings and things like that. And they don't have like a DocuSign or an electronic signature thing right now. So what we have kind of said is sometimes you may have multiple signature pages. Like if you have the team in front of you that attended in person, have them sign that signature page. But if you have people that didn't come and you need to send it home to the parent, for example, or something like that, you don't want to lose those signatures. So send a separate page home for the parent to sign, and then they can send it back and you'll attach it to the form. So you may have some extra signature pages. It's not ideal, but in order to get that, to meet this part of the compliance, it may be necessary. All right. Any questions about the SLD form? Okay. Hopefully you guys can see this little quiz a little bit better. Okay. Why is this not compliant? I just talked about this, so maybe fresh in your mind.
Need signatures.
Right, exactly. There are no signatures, so you cannot just put that it was virtual and that verbal consent was given. So this is my attempt at all the members signed it. So don't copy that because that's incorrect, but just have everybody sign it either electronically or handwritten. Okay. Moving on to our final eligibility form, we have our speech or language impairment eligibility form. Again, best practice for this form is that you document that conversation or completion of the form in the written notice, just stating that you completed it and that the team is determined that they either qualify or don't qualify. That way, everyone knows that you went through the form together and made that determination. Okay, this first section is the meat of the form. And so your decisions are based on a variety of sources that is given for every eligibility category. And you must complete the severity rating scales that follow these questions. And if one of those severity rating scales, like if you didn't take it into account, because oftentimes fluency or voice are not even considered, that's when you would check the no assessment needed. And you'll see that because I have snapshots of the severity rating scales. And then best practice is that you, again, check the correct box for each question, just making sure you have that yes, no answered, and then put those summaries and explanations. And then these are some sources of verification that you could include. And I would lean on your professionals that you work with, because if you're filling out a speech or language impairment form, then hopefully your speech and language pathologist and the one that completed the evaluation is there with you so they can help you through this process. Same with that specific learning disability form. Hopefully the psychologist is there to help guide you through those questions. I know I leaned on my psych evaluators a lot when filling out those SLD forms. Okay, so with the 4 questions, it's about those different types of speech or language impairments. So the first one's about articulation. So do they have an articulation according to the articulation severity rating scale? So you're really using those severity rating scales to help you complete these answers, because those severity rating scales need to be in that moderate severe range. That's why they're dark grayed out in order to qualify for each of those areas. If they're just in the mild and no apparent problem or whatever it is, then they do not qualify. So really using those scales to help you out. So if you check yes or no, again, you need to have verification. So making sure that you're including those assessments that were given along with those scores or data from those assessments that verify that they do qualify or do not. And then even if it was not an area of, no assessment needed checked on the severity rating scale, it's best to put the verification here where you just say it wasn't an area of suspected disability, or you could even copy the no assessment needed from the rating scale and put it here. Leaving that verification box blank, again, just kind of makes me feel a little icky, even if it's a thing. But if we can see it on the severity rating scale, we count it as compliant. So then once you do all of those different areas of possible speech or language impairment, they ask, does a speech or language impairment exist? So again, just make sure you're checking the correct box, yes or no. Then it goes on, again, is it adversely affecting their performance, their educational performance? So they may have a speech or language disability, but it may not be affecting their educational performance, just like any other disability. So it's really 2 separate questions. So check yes or no. And then verify. If it is adversely affecting their educational performance, you need verification of how, and put that in there. And if it's no, you still need verification. So just remember for either or. Then if you're moving on, because you did say it was educationally impacting them, is it to such a degree that they require special ed, or can it be addressed through gen ed with accommodations? Remember to check the AB and then give that verification of why they're either receiving special education or can have accommodations in gen ed. And then making sure that you attach those severity rating scales and that they're completed for that student. So here's that articulation severity rating scale. I apologize if it's so small. But like I said, you've got your moderate, severe. It needs to be like those boxes need to be checked in those dark gray areas in order for a student to be eligible for that area. And then you can see with the yellow little arrow at the top, that's where you would check if there was no articulation assessment needed. So for any of these forms, for these severity rating scales, there's that box at the top that's available. If you don't check that box, then we would expect that the rest of the form is filled out. Here's the language severity rating scale. You've got that box that says there was no language assessment needed. So if you do that, then that covers that severity rating scale. If it's not checked, we would expect that the rest of the form was completed. Excuse me. Then we have the fluency one, same rules apply. And then there's just a little note here about students in CDS. A standardized assessment is not required. So they give you some ideas about alternative assessment procedures for students in CDS. Then the voice severity rating scale. So all four of these do need to be filled out for any type of speech or language, even if they were not assessed or in that area. You're just going to check that box up in the left-hand corner. And then just a little note that a voice impairment is a medical condition, so there does need to be a diagnosis from a physician. And hopefully your speech or language person can kind of help you with that whole process as well. Okay, any questions about the speech or language form? Okay. Here's my last quiz question for you. So here is questions 1 through 4 of the speech or language eligibility form. So why would we mark this non-compliant if we saw this when we came in? Any ideas?
You still need verification on the nose.
Yes, thank you. Okay, so right, there's no verification for number 3 and 4 because there were no, but then also 1 and 2, they just say those scores. They don't include the scores. So really thinking about putting those scores, the data that actually comes with those assessments in there for those yeses or nos. So here it gets a little more detailed. You've got the Goldman-Fristow and the standard score, and then the self and the standard scores to go with those yeses. And then for those nos, I've added that not an area of suspected disability. This would be very good. So, all right. We have some commonly asked questions about eligibility forms. We may have touched on these throughout, but we'll just go through. Do all of the questions on the adverse effect form have to be answered? So yes, because if it's not yes or no, then it's NA. So NA is not available. So if you don't have something for that question, make sure to check the NA. Do they need to be completed during the IEP team meeting? Yes, and that's why we say it's best to also make that note on the written notice so that then everyone's clear that, you know, you completed this during the meeting and there's no question. Okay, and we have some resources, but before I jump into resources, are there any final questions about anything? I'm going to keep going, but if anything comes up, please feel free to jump in. Our first resource we always share is the procedural manual. Excellent resource for all special ed forms, especially when it comes to eligibility forms. MUSER, the Maine Unified Special Ed Regulations. And like I said, this is a great resource when you're thinking about determining eligibility. It does go into how do you do that, those definitions. So it's not as easy a read, but it is a useful tool. Then we have our IEP quick reference document. And these are other links to just so many resources. We have so many things. I'm sure you probably don't have enough time to investigate everything. But the top one will take you to our PD calendar. So anything offered by the Department of Education, you can find there and sign up to join and participate in that, just like today's office hours. The second one is the link to our recordings and PowerPoints. So everything we do, we record and we put it up on our website. So you can go back and access those at a time that's more convenient for you. And so that's our link to that. And then we have more resources and laws and regulations and forms. This is our PD schedule that we've been going through for the 24-25 school year. You can see that we've done these and we have the recordings and the slides available. I must not have, oh, I haven't updated this one. So I must have made this before I put the new links. There have been some more of these added where they say recording coming soon. They are up on our website, but if you click recording coming soon, it takes you to our professional learning page, which you'll see all of them listed on there. So you can just click that link and find them there. We have one more office hours coming up on the 28th. It's not a Friday. I don't know why that says Friday. I think that's probably said that all through the 24-25 and I've never fixed it. Anyway, you can join us for that. And this is our feedback and contact hour form. So we really do appreciate your feedback. Ashley just dropped it in the chat. If you fill that out and select today's training, which is 5, 14, 25 eligibility forms, then you will get a contact hour certificate for joining us today, along with the PDF versions of the PowerPoints, our PD schedule, which is almost done, and our IEP quick reference document. We send those out with this. We do appreciate the feedback. We try to adjust our PD based off of the feedback that we get. So please let us know how we're doing. And then this is where you can find Maine DOE online and social media. This is our contact information. So please feel free to reach out to us at any time. We are the supervision, monitoring, and support team. So we really enjoy the support part of our job a little bit more than we like our supervision monitoring. So we are here to support you. So please reach out if you have any questions. If you're like, filling out this IEP, is this okay? Is this compliant? You can do it with forms. You can do it with anything, basically, and we will give you feedback around that. Just do not send us any student identifying information or put it on a form. Like copy and paste it out of the form and like just make it generic in an email, and we're happy to get back to you. All right. And that's it from us today. Any final questions before I get you back to your afternoon? Okay. Awesome. Enjoy the weather. It's actually beautiful outside. Have a great one. Thank you, everybody.